Hi, today I want to show you how you can deploy an application on your live server without handling single CFML files. You can simply by having archives. Um, my example, I simply have two files. An index.cfml file that calls a CFC and that CFC itself. The CFC just say hi, and here I simply instantiate the CFC and call the CFC. So the CFM file is in the folder video deploy in the web root. So when I call it, you see there I already have the URL here. When I call it, I get an error because it doesn't find the CFC itself. The reason for that is the CFC is not in the web root. It is outside the web root. When you go to the URLs, you see it's in the components folder that is outside the web root. The reason for that is I personally never put components inside the web root, only if I want to make a remote CFC. Otherwise, I always have my CFC outside the web root. So the CFC is located here. That's the root of the server. There I have a folder components, and in that folder I have a package structure with that CFC. So first of all, I do a mapping in the Lucee admin. I go to components, and the end of components you can define component mappings. So I give that mapping the name CFCs or my CFCs. Then I get the path of that folder, store it. So now I have mapped this CFC folder or component folder. When I call now this, it should work. It works now because Lucee now finds that CFC. So again, code that calls the CFC or with a complete package name, then I call it. So now, second thing we change is that the moment we simply call, we have no mapping for that index CFM file, we simply call it. Let me get the path to that one. So now we go to the admin, and we now may also make a mapping for that one. So okay, we call that mapping deploy. Then that should point to the deploy folder. That's it. After that, instead of calling video deploy, we directly can call the mapping. You see, it still works. Now we have two mapping with our application. One mapping for the CFM files or everything you have in our application, and one for the components. Of course, you can mix that together if you like, but that's how I do it. When you go back to the admin, we now create archives for these mappings. That means Lucee can always have a source, the source files in a mapping, and an archive or an archive. In that case, we first do both. So we go to the deploy mapping in the detail view. At the end, we can create an archive. The archive can contain the source files, but that's not really necessary. That's only needed if you want to have, in the case of an exception, you want to see the source code in the browser. If you don't need that, you don't need to add the CFML files. Right. Keep it that, and you can also add non-CFML files, so JS files, GIFs, images, and so on, and still use that in your code. I create based on that mapping and now create an archive, and I attach that archive to that mapping. When I do that, you see it's already done. It has stored the archive in webinf Lucee context archives, and it's attached to that mapping. Go to the overview page, you also see it here, it's attached to that mapping now. Okay, next thing, we go to the component mapping. See, we also go here to my CFCs, go with a detailed view of that. Here's exactly the same. We create an archive and attach it to that mapping. And you see, like with the regular mapping, it has attached that archive and copy it to the same place as it has copied the regular mapping. When we go there, webin folder, Lucee, context, archives, you see we have this mapping here. Now we could simply take this archives and deploy on our target server to install our application. That's the only thing we need, these two mappings. I store at that, but I don't want to start up a second server, so we delete the mappings and everything here. So I'll go to the component mapping and I delete that mapping. So you see it's gone. Then I go to mappings. I delete the deploy folder, deploy mapping. That's also gone. Go to the file system. I delete the deploy folder here. Then we go to the root and we delete the component folder here. So that application is completely gone. When we go back to the browser, we call it, it's no longer working, it's gone. So what we do now is we go to the webin folder, and in the webin folder we have the Lucee folder, and in there is a deploy folder. Now we simply copy this two archives here, and we have to wait a little bit. That can take up to a minute, and Lucee checks every minute if there's a new archive or a new also extension in that deploy folder. If so, it installs that archive in that case, and you don't have to restart the server. That works everything without anything. So you have to wait a little bit. It's gone now. So that means when it's disappeared, it's installed. And when we go back to the admin, we go first to the mappings. You see, again, we have a deploy mapping. In that case, we only have to install the archive. So it's just the archive. So no source code anymore. It's just the Lucee archive. And the second thing we have on the components, we also have that mapping for my CFCs, the component mapping. It's also there. Okay, when I go now back to the URL, I call the URL and you see it working. So I can install my application by simply copy the archives to the deploy folder, wait a minute, and my application is there. I can update, can simply store that stuff. So it's a very easy way to deploy an application on the server. I hope this video was helpful to you. Have a good one.